Hello everybody. So I am Laura Gutman and this is my book, Army Brat World War II, just out. I wanted to read you a section, but I wanted to start with the epigraph. I wanted a small piece that would set the scene for the entire book. The outlook. And what I was trying to say is, supposing you are looking at a job or a journey that looks very long, very tough, harsh, difficult, rocky, and you think, no, maybe I just won't go or I won't do it. And then afterward, you realize that you wouldn't give up any part of that experience. You wouldn't give up the painful parts and the good parts. It was all a complete part of who you are. So I couldn't find a quote. I knew there must be one, probably in the Bible or Shakespeare or Blake or Hardy or something like that, but I couldn't find it. So I had to write my own. If I had known how rough the journey was to be, I might have turned aside. How strange, I now hold dear those pleasures and those griefs that joined me on that ride. And that is the way I feel about it. So I'm going to read a section. This is a time that occurred after the end of World War II, and when we were stationed back in Germany, very shortly after the war. So this is page 91. Dad continued playing competitive chess and was very good. Generals and other senior leaders often wanted to practice with him and vied with each other to see who could take a game from him. Because the chess network was also social, my parents frequently hosted the senior officers who commanded the occupation army. These were the people at the numerous parties my parents threw, and those parties were deeply consequential events. It was at those parties that somber, serious, and weighty matters of German and European governance and futures were openly identified and discussed. I happened to be at the perfect age to take maximal advantage of the give and take that was passing over our dining room table. I was old enough to help Mother, and I had a background understanding of the issues that were up for discussion. The topics would be raised during cocktails, and then during a sit-down dinner, the issues would receive sharp, leisurely, in-depth, and very candid treatment. Discussion, coffee, brandy, and cigars could last long into the night. We, the children, were lurking around during these parties, listening to everything, helping with the service quietly on the side before, after, and throughout. The families of all my friends were having similar parties, and all of us kids would gossip about and rehash what was being said. We knew what was happening. We were fully aware of the grave nature of the threats and worries that the highest levels of the U.S. Army were struggling over. Some of the topics that came up recurrently included the conundrum for providing for the waves of refugees that continued to flood toward the western sectors. Refugee camps were filling back up, and the camps that had existed at the end of the war had not fully emptied either. An even larger topic was the means of dealing with an increasingly hostile Russia. Senior Army officers were adamant that strategic armaments would be needed in any future war, arms that would dominate the battlefield and could be deployed without blowing up the planet. Small atomic weapons were needed and were not available. Another topic revolved around efforts to prevent small nations, and larger ones too, from tipping politically into the Russian and communist orbits. Greece seemed to be of particular concern and was having a dire civil war. A stable German currency was assumed to be key to a Western-leaning German future. Some months after our time in Berlin, the attitude of the Army officers toward the German people seemed to take a dramatic shift. Before, at parties, the kids heard a tough and punitive attitude toward German civilian suffering. Dinner table discussions during parties at our house regarding possible means to improve the well-being of the general German public were usually accompanied by disparaging side comments about the horrific treatment the Germans had dished out to the French, to the Dutch, and Polish civilians. Whatever hardships the Germans might now be enduring were trivial in comparison, and they're just desserts. Hostility and anger had accompanied discussions of other defective German character traits, such as their racism, brutality, aggression, moral turpitude, and general depravity. Then, starting around 1948 or 49, we kids started to hear a new outlook. The Germans had always been given open credit for their admirable national work ethic and were acknowledged to be energetic, organized, and educated. Slowly, the negative traits were mentioned less and less often. Where we had heard mutterings about German mass insanity, their genetic propensity for barbarism, their inherent yearning to be led into criminality, and their unresolvable craving to tyrannize neighboring nations, we instead began to hear more about the wisdom of cultivating a strong German democracy to enable a stable Europe to emerge from the disasters of the 20th century. Nevertheless, the targeted, lethal, abominable malevolence which the Germans had inflicted on Jews was seldom directly talked about at these parties, or anywhere else for that matter. By then, German schools were required to teach about crimes their government had perpetrated during World War II, so the fate of Jews under German control was not an altogether unmentionable topic, at least in theory. So I'm going to cut off here, but I chose this to be an example of the way in which we felt that as children we were at the center of what was happening, were involved in it, and that it mattered to us, that we were part of a purpose-driven situation. Thank you very much. Again, Army Brat, World War II. Please buy the book.